Marco shoved the penthouse door open and announced, "She's here, our bride," thrusting a drenched woman into the foyer under the terrace rain. The doorman's voice sliced through the house quiet, and a dozen pairs of eyes turned toward the newcomer. Suspicion tightened in Emma Calder's chest the second the marble floor swallowed her wet shoes. She held the florist's box against her ribcage as if the cardboard could keep the heat of her palms contained. Emma did not speak. She had no business in this building, and no place at that table of silk and restraint. The entrance lamp hit the pollen stains on her apron, and made them look like small, human accusations. She kept her head down and let the staff decide her story. That decision silence sprang from the same place that had kept her from leaving the shop after a difficult weekend. A quiet curiosity and a bruise of loneliness that came from years of small, steady work that did not demand a name. Adrian Blackwood stepped from the terrace in a long overcoat, rain beading on his shoulders. He moved with a held-back force that filled the room as surely as the storm filled the skyline. "You who brought her in," he said. The sentence landed like a command. It was the first of many practical, sharp questions that would try to pin the night down to facts. "Marco, you said," Lydia began, voice thin in the foyer. Lydia, the wedding planner, had the list and the schedule memorized. She was the one who could see contracts as living documents. "She matches the note." She was found in the lobby with a bouquet. Adrian cut her off with one measured step closer. He looked at Emma as if cataloging whether, and "Wait, you are not Mrs. Blackwood," he said. His baritone held no anger, only a neutral, clinical demand for truth. Emma lifted her face then, slow, and met his grey eyes. She smelled wet soil and faint citrus on herself. She could have said, "I am not your bride." Instead, she let the silence sit in the room like a third body. Marcus from security moved a half step forward and folded his arms. There was emotion in the staff. Evelyn, the housekeeper, crossed to a console and tapped a screeningist registry. "Does not show her name." She said, "There are discrepancies with arrivals." Lydia pulled her phone out. He called the lobby. The wedding party expected one woman at 9. "The car that arrived is listed." "Stop. Adrian, show me the car manifest." He kept his voice controlled, but his fingers tightened on the railing. Adrian's control was his tool. Control was what his family business built and what his father had demanded. He had learned to sharpen it into armor. Emma watched the crease between his brows appear and realized she had seen that crease before on a photograph she'd dusted in a shop once. A man with the same jaw holding a child at a park opening. She felt an odd, quick sympathy that she could not name yet. Marcus intercepted a hotel envelope and held it up. The paper bore the intended bride's name. "This was left in the VIP check-in, sir," he said. "We need confirmation." He looked at Emma and then at Adrian. The room shifted toward procedure. Adrian turned to Emma. "What is your name?" he asked. She answered softly. Emma, the one-word reply landed small in that large room. He repeated the question, slower. "Emma Calder." She nodded, eyes that should have solved everything. It did not. Lydia's voice carried the weight of consequence. "Adrian, the marriage secures the Meriton merger. The board expects the ceremony to cement the transfer of shares. If this is a mistake," Adrian's jaw tightened. He did not ask how the merger would change his life. He did not say that this ceremony had been scheduled to stop a hostile takeover. He only moved with a clarity that suggested he understood the ledger consequences intimately. "Then verify her identity," he said. Emma felt the first shift in her feelings there, suspicion bending toward unease. She realized she could leave. She realized also that leaving would mean returning to her small shop soaked and shamed and explaining a lie she had not yet told. She had delivered a bouquet to the building earlier that night when a taxi had refused to wait and had been sent back by Marco, who had said the VIP entrance was closed. She had waited in the lobby and taken a call that she thought was about a job, then been led up because she could not find a cab in the storm. It had been a mistake, but nothing in the room asked for that explanation. Adrian's staff moved like a rehearsed team. Marcus took Emma's wet coat to air it by the service stair. Evelyn offered a towel. Lydia's phone buzzed and she read, brow knitting, there is an envelope in the car addressed to Miss Avery Meriton. The driver insists he delivered to the wrong floor. He will be downstairs for confirmation. Emma held the towel and wrapped it around her hair. Rainwater dripped from the hem of her dress. She shifted her weight and draped the florist box over one wrist. She had come to Manhattan to rest after a week of double shifts and a broken sink at the shop. She had not come to rearrange the direction of two families. She was led into the living room to wait. The room smelled faintly of citrus candles and leather. Portraits hung in precise alignment. A tall lamp threw a sliver of warm light across a coffee table where an unopened invitation lay. Emma sat on the edge of a sofa and pressed her palms to the cardboard of the box as if to reassure herself. The staff kept a polite distance but watched every small movement. Adrian watched her watch the room. He a trivial question, not because he needed the answer, but because a trivial question would reveal habits. Do you know roses? He said. Emma blinked. She had learned how to gauge a person by what they asked about flowers. It depends on the rose. She said tea roses take a lot of water. Hybrid teas want deep soil. They bruise when handled with gloves. She kept her voice level. Her fingers went unconsciously to a bruise on the bouquet. One rose had a bent petal. Adrian processed the detail and, for the first time, his shoulders slackened a degree. There was a small thaw. He nothing, but his eyes softened in a way that made Emma's fingers tense. She felt the second emotional shift then, cautious empathy slipping under the suspicion and the unease. A new sound arrived, footsteps in the stairwell, closer this time. The wedding planner, Lydia, stepped forward, phone still in hand. Adrian, I have the board on the line. They need assurance. If this is a security breach, the merger could collapse. We need to be precise. Her voice had a clipped efficiency that implied stakes beyond the room. Marcus left briefly and returned with confirmation that the driver downstairs insisted he had handed an envelope to the woman stepping out of the black sedan. Lydia's lips thinned. She addressed Emma with procedural politeness. Can you show identification? Emma opened her wallet. It trembled. Her hands were small but steady. She handed over a city ed and a delivery receipt. Lydia scanned the documents and then frowned. The name on the receipt did not match the envelope. Emma explained the delivery log, the cancelled cab, the lobby confusion. The staff listened and let the facts settle. None of the facts explained why no one had called her earlier to check. A restlessness grew in the room as if the house wanted to push a decision out. Adrian left for the terrace to smoke even though rain still spat at the glass. He stood with his back to the skyline and watched the city as if he were trying to measure distance with a precise eye. Emma followed as if drawn by a gravity she did not understand. On the terrace, wind stripped water from the plants and set silver lines across the skyline. Adrian kept his coat on though the house was warm. His hands were folded. He watched his palms as if they were a map. Why didn't you correct them? The question arrived slow and calm. Emma answered honestly, was cold. I had nowhere else to go until I got a cab. I thought the driver would sort it out. You thought the driver would solve it, Adrian repeated. He watched the way she said her words, how she avoided eye contact when she spoke of small practicalities. He had expected a liar to be louder. He had expected an impostor to defend a lie. He found neither. Marcus reappeared with an envelope. He held it out like evidence. The name on that envelope matched the ceremony program and all planning documents, Avery Meriton. Adrian's fingers closed around the paper, then released it. The staff watched for his decision. Adrian walked back inside and the room contracted toward him. He demanded to see the envelope. Lydia unfolded the flap, and the paper slid from the folder onto the coffee table. It bore a note, short, typed a cancellation, apparently addressed to him. Adrian read it and his face did something he rarely allowed. It went bare with a private grief. Emma sat frozen. She forced herself to look at the note. The typed lines mentioned a personal emergency and regret. There was no flourish, no apology beyond a businesslike sentence. Adrian's hand trembled on the paper. He swallowed and then, with a voice that tried to keep things efficient, he said, "If she is not coming, then we will proceed with what is necessary. But first we confirm identity." Lydia pressed the pointer. "Corporate requires we proceed or postpone. Postponement will cost us share leverage. We need certainty now." Her tone was not cruel. It was a statement of outcome. Adrian's face sharpened around the eyes. He moved through the staff with the motion of someone who could see a ledger laid out across the room and knew which accounts were at risk. Emma felt a new motion inside her, an unfamiliar protectiveness toward a stranger in a photograph she had not yet really seen. She did not know this man beyond his public shape, but she had touched the photograph at the shop and had watched the boy in it run toward someone who had once smiled openly. Seeing Adrian's trembling hand made her feel the outline of his loss, as if it were a weather pattern rather than a theory. She could have left then. She could have corrected the record. She did neither. Alone for a moment, Emma slipped into Adrian's study while the others argued over procedure in hushed tones. The study smelled faintly of cedar and old paper. Books were arranged by height and colored leather. On the desk she found a framed photograph of Adrian with a young woman and a small girl seated on a picnic blanket. The sunlight captured a laugh on his face that did not match his present stiffness. The photograph had dust on its corner and a crease where someone had set a thumb while reading. Next to it lay a folded letter with handwriting she could not yet read. Her curiosity moved faster than caution. She unfolded the letter. It was personal, 2 lines of apology and a mention of grief that had not been shared with staff. The handwriting shook slightly where the writer had paused. Emma's breathing narrowed. She felt compassion, then guilt. The compassion surprised her more than anything. She read the letter again and realized the wedding had been slated to seal a partnership because a family needed stability. The woman who cancelled had cited illness, but not the cause. The letter implied a personal fracture that had nothing to do with shareholders. She heard footsteps in the hall and replaced the letter quickly. When Adrian returned to the study, he did not say he had been reading his own private letters. He only watched her hands as if assessing whether she had touched something she should not have. "Did you look at that?" he asked. Emma's reply was simply, "A page fell open. I read it." Adrian's breath left him in a small, sharp sound. "That letter is not public." He moved to the desk and gathered the photograph and paper in a careful motion way. "Did you not leave downstairs?" he asked again, softer this time. Emma met him. He did not know where to go in a storm. She said he thought the lobby would be safer. "When the doorman said they needed me, I awaited." Adrian stared at her a beat and then shifted his weight. "Are you lying, Emma?" The question was not shouted, but it was direct. Emma signed her name with a small motion. "Oh, Adrian." There was a quick exchange in the living room. Lydia interrupted to say someone from the car would be up in 10. Marcus informed Adrian that security had cross-checked the guest list and found no match. Evelyn Lydia, the kitchen, could make tea. The room moved with practical responses to an immediate problem. Adrian thought for a long moment, then he surprised everyone. He ordered the staff to give her privacy and a cup of hot tea. He did not ask her to leave. He did not insist she be escorted out. Lydia protested, arguing the optics. "Adrian, the board do it," he said. The word cut off her protests. He looked at Emma with an odd mixture of command and quiet. "Stay in the living room. If anyone asks, tell them you are waiting for a cab." Emma blinked. The permission felt like a small mercy and a larger puzzle. She accepted the cup Evelyn placed in her hands and sipped. The tea was strong and cut through the chill. She watched Adrian pour a cigarette into the tray and then close his palm around it before smoking. He did not look like a man relieved. He looked like a man who had decided on a temporary reprieve. Outside, the storm eased to a steady rain. Inside, voices dropped to a hum as staff debated logistics. Conrad, an assistant, came up and handed Adrian a tablet with procurement notes. Adrian scrolled, then looked at Emma. "Why did you not correct Marco?" he asked one more time. Emma answered, plainly dunt, like making a scene. Adrian let out a short sound, almost like an unvoiced laugh. Most people would prefer the correct version of events. He said, "Why not you?" She looked at him. "Because I was tired of being noticed only for mistakes." The line was small and honest, not theatrical. Adrian's expression shifted. There was a flicker of something like recognition. He sat down across from her as if testing a different posture, less like a judge, more like a person who needed to observe quietly. "He about the florist shop, is it still on Loring Street?" He said, "He's 2 rooms down from the bakery. We close early on Sundays." Adrian's eyes softened. He did not ask the usual prying questions. Instead he said, "Show me one thing in your box." Emma opened the top and revealed a bouquet whose stems were wrapped in brown paper. One rose had a nicked petal. Adrian reached out and touched the edge as if testing for water. The motion was careful. "You tied these yourself?" he asked. She answered, "I did." There was a brief silence in which the staff resumed their hushed planning. Then Marcus returned with a fresh piece of information. The driver downstairs had called and insisted someone in the house had signed for an envelope at 9:05. The driver wanted to confirm who had taken it. Adrian's face lost its private composure. He walked toward the terrace and then back in a sudden arc. He took the envelope Lydia had placed on the table earlier and held it out to Emma as if offering a test. "Open it," he said. Emma's fingers hovered but did not touch. The night had layered decisions on her head until she felt a weight behind every breath. To open the envelope would be to commit to a role she had not chosen. To refuse would be to leave, and perhaps leave a man she did not know to the sudden glare of the board's scrutiny. She slid a finger under the flap and pulled. Inside was a single card and a short note, a polite regret and a signature. The card confirmed that Avery Meriton would not attend. Emma read it aloud, because someone had to make the words real. "Avery Meriton regrets she cannot attend the ceremony due to personal reasons." Adrian's hand closed on the back of a chair. He quietly, "Then there is no bride." The room responded. Lydia's face blanching, Marcus calculating next steps, Evelyn folding a napkin as if simple order could quiet all that might follow. Adrian looked at Emma, and the last barrier between them felt, for a sliver, not like wealth and not like contract, but like an absence that both of them could stand in. He did not know how to invite her into that absence. He the staff to withdraw. He wanted 2 of them to remain. They left with the soft clack of heels and shoes. The penthouse closed like a mouth. Lydia lingered at the doorway. "This cannot be handled casually, Adrian," she said. He did not reply. He moved to the window and watched rain stitch the skyline. Then he turned, said a single instruction. "Give her privacy." The instruction dissolved the professional noise. Evelyn hovered and then placed a spare shawl on Emma's shoulders. Marcus kept the front door in his sight, and Lydia took her phone and walked toward the staircase. The house thinned. Emma felt the room drop to a smaller scale, 3 people and a paper with a name on it. Adrian sat down opposite her, and the 2 of them looked at each other without staff between them for the first time. The storm outside had reduced to a steady wash. He one more question, softer than before. "Why did you not tell them you were not Avery?" Emma looked at her hands on the soaked cardboard. "Because I did not want to be pushed out when I had nowhere else to go." He considered that, then said, with an exhaustion that seemed to belong more to the private man than the public one, "Then stay a little while. We will find out what happened. Do not leave until then." She nodded. The silence they shared then was not ornamental. It held decisions that had been made and others that had not. Emma pressed the warm cup to her palms and thought of the shop, of the bell above the door, of the way single customers sometimes asked about her life, and she gave an honest, small answer. She had not planned to step into anyone's life that night. Yet she sat in the house of a man whose private grief she had seen in a photograph and whose public obligations might topple with one misstep. Outside the terrace, lightning sketched a brief white line across the clouds, but no one flinched. The staff returned with names and contingency plans. "Lydia, if the board will not accept postponement, we will stage a private signing. We need confirmation of identity, proof of residency or representation. Marcus, I will double-check the car logs." Adrian stood and walked to the console. He tapped Connor, his assistant, and said, "Find her. Bring me everything about her that was recorded in the lobby." His voice was a simple order. Connor left with the tablet and a quick salute. Emma looked up at Adrian as if waiting for some final verdict. Adrian surprised her again. "Until we sort this, remain in the house. I will not have you paraded downstairs for optics." Emma's shoulders dropped in a small, private relief. She had chosen silence, and the choice had been met with a decision from someone with far more power than she possessed. The power did not change the fact that she had made the choice. At dawn the storm had become a thin rain. Emma returned to her shop and worked the morning deliveries with hands that still remembered the warm cup and the cold envelope. At 9 she pressed a single petal between the pages of a journal she kept for pressed flowers and wrote the address of the penthouse in the margin. It was not a promise, it was a trace. Up in the penthouse, Adrian did not sleep. He scanned the guest lists, reread the folded letter, refolded it carefully, and then left the card unopened on the coffee table. When Connor returned with the lobby video and the driver's number, Adrian called the number and ended the call with a name to his assistant. "Find her," he said. And this time he did not ask. He instructed. Emma left a pressed petal on the penthouse foyer table because she did not have a better way to mark that she had been there. Adrian saw it when he walked into the foyer in the first moments of light. He did not pick it up immediately. He stood and looked at it, and then, finally, he tapped his phone and said, "Find her." Adrian stood and said, "This is our betrothed," before anyone at the table could form a question. Suspicion tightened in Emma's chest the instant every pair of eyes fixed on her. She felt the marble under her shoes, the scrape of the chair as someone pushed back, the sharp intake of breath from the matriarch. She had no time to answer. Voices bubbled up at once. Marco's hurried, a staffer's sharp whisper, a cousin's startled laugh, and the household moved like a machine relocating parts around a new, unexpected input. Emma kept her hands folded in her lap. She could feel water drying along the hem of her dress and the faint grit under her soles from the terrace. Her first impulse was to stand and correct Adrian, to say her name and the truth. She was Emma Calder, a florist from the block. Not a woman contracted to the Blackwood name. Suspicion pushed her to listen first. She watched faces for the smallest crack. She herself that a single word from her would send them shifting back into their old plan. But she paused because curiosity and a quiet calculation spread through her more quickly than panic. Across the table, Adrian's face held its usual controlled line. He raised his chin, as if testing how the announcement landed. She arrived in the storm. Marco, helpful and loud, found her on the terrace. She looks the part. Sir Marco's hand hovered too long near Emma's sleeve, as if to steady the lie had manufactured. Evelyn Blackwood leaned forward, folding a napkin with slow, deliberate fingers. "Adrian, what proof do we have?" The question landed like a legal strike rather than a family rebuke. Emma forced her voice to a level where everyone could hear him. "Soaked," she said, and the room reacted to that small fact. That was the first time her feet had moved. A housemaid offered a towel. Lena, moving with the discreet urgency of someone who had worked in the building for years, reached to tuck the towel around Emma's shoulders. Emma let Lena's hand stay a beat too long. She felt the warmth and the weight of being held in a house that did not belong to her. Evelyn's eyes narrowed. "State your name." Her tone carried menace dressed as protocol. Emma answered simply, "Emma Calder." She spoke with the calm she had when she sold flowers, precise, small talk softened by muscle memory. The matriarch asked for family, for origins, for dates. Each question was a small investigation that aimed to undress her into a file they could file away. Suspicion did not leave Emma, it shifted. The family's suspicion toward her grew obvious, and her own suspicion of their motives deepened when Benedict Shaw, the family's lawyer, cleared his throat and produced paper. The lawyer's presence changed the room's gravity. Benedict placed a slim folder on the table and pushed it toward Adrian. There are timelines, he said, announcements, photographers, legal notices. We need to know if this is genuine. He flipped a page with a sound that made the table go quiet again. Marco answered for them. We'll sort it, he said. For now. She is under our roof. Marco's voice had the practiced ease of someone used to rearranging emergencies into manageable statements. Evelyn's scrutiny moved like a hand inspecting cloth. What are you doing here? She asked Emma directly. The question was plain and edged. It wanted motive, not explanation. Emma's mouth opened to explain the simplest truth. She had come to collect a delivery that Marco had misread as a bridal arrival, but she stopped. Curiosity pushed through her suspicion like a tool. If she corrected them now, she would be back on the sidewalk with wet shoes and no memory in their minds. If she stayed, she might learn why a man like Adrian Blackwood could mistake her for someone else. Lena leaned near Emma and said in a lower voice, "You were at my grandson's recital last week. I saw you buy lilies. If you need anything, tell me." The offer arrived like an anchor. Emma felt the tension inside her shift from immediate fear to measured consideration. She met Lena's gaze and nodded. That small alley changed the stakes. It provided Emma with a tiny reservoir of human insurance inside a hostile house. Conversation bifurcated. At the table, family members argued quietly about schedules and the optics of scandal. In the service corridor, Marco moved toward other staff with a list of contingencies. He locked the ration of statements. Contact parked, keep guests away. Lena, keep watch near her. His voice was brisk and businesslike. In the private parlor, Lena guided Emma to a chair and offered tea. Emma accepted because it kept her hands busy and steadied her pulse. The room smelled faintly of lemon oil and old upholstery, sensory details that grounded her more than any internal narrative. Adrian followed at a loose distance. He watched without interrupting. When he entered the parlor, his presence filled the doorway with the same quiet control had worn at the table. He closed the door behind him and sat opposite Emma without invitation. "Why are you quiet?" he asked. His words were economical. Emma answered, "Because I'm trying to understand what you think I am." The line landed like a challenge. Adrian's expression softened for the first time in the morning. He folded his hands, paused, then said, "You could tell me your name again." It without slate. The request was simple, almost procedural, but the distance in the room remained. The interrogation that followed was less about names and more about testing. Adrian, where she had been that night, what she had seen on the terrace, whether anyone else in town would recognize her. Emma's replies were short and exact. She spoke about the florist's delivery schedule, the street lamp blinked along her block, the delivery truck that splashed water up onto her shoe. Each concrete detail either confirmed or contradicted the version Marco had offered. After 3 short exchanges, "Adrian, Marco says you arrived drenched and wordless. That cannot be comfortable." The sentence was an attempt at empathy and an examination wrapped together. Emma felt another shift in her feelings, from guarded curiosity to a cautious sympathy. She noticed Adrian's scar at the temple when he tilted his head while listening. It caught a sliver of morning light. She noticed the crease between his brows when he concentrated. Those details did not soften her resolve. They informed a calculation. If she allowed herself to be catalogued as his bride, she would lose the small autonomy that kept her shop alive. If she left now, she risked being erased from any account of what had happened on the terrace. Footsteps signaled the next external event. Benedict arrived in the parlor with an official tone. He set down another envelope and unfolded a clause. There are legal consequences if an engagement is announced and later revoked without cause, he said. His voice did not raise, but the words were exact instruments. The family will be photographed. Statements will be issued. A contract can be drafted in your name to formalize the arrangement before public notice. The room's temperature dropped in practical terms. Paper would turn improvisation into obligation. Emma's hands tightened in her lap. The sensation moved through her as a physical tighten, her nails pressing into the palm of her hand. Her first emotional shift toward fear arrived in a bodily way rather than a label. She felt her throat narrow and her breathing shorten. She looked at Adrian for a sign. He did not offer one. Marco hovered at the door, thumbs hooked into his vest like a stage manager waiting to cue the next act. 2 can delay statements a day. Marco can verify her identity tonight. Marco's quick solutions sounded rehearsed. They offered time, but they also bought momentum for the household's plan. Evelyn's interrogation changed tone when she saw Benedict's papers. She pressed for background. Where had Emma worked? Who knew her? Whether anyone could contradict the story being built. Emma supplied small fax addresses, the name of her landlord, the names of regular customers. The matriarch listened for inconsistencies. When none were obvious, Evelyn's suspicion did not evaporate. It sharpened into a test of performance. If you accept this role, she said, you will carry the Blackwood name in public. What do you intend to do with that responsibility? Emma's reply was measured. Intend to be honest when it matters, she said. The sentence functioned as both a redirection and an attempt to define herself on her own terms. The words annoyed Evelyn and drew a thin smile from Benedict. Adrian did not smile. He observed the exchange and then asked Emma to recount a single memory from her childhood, a small test to see whether she had the habit of telling believable life details. Emma of her father's hands when he showed her how to tie ribbon around a bouquet. The memory was precise, the smell of dust on the ribbon spool, the way his thumb caught a fiber. No one broke the scene for sentiment. The memory served as a credential. After the parlor meeting, Marco led the staff into a quick huddle in the service corridor. His voice was low and rapid. Photographers get delayed until noon. Pre-drafts will be neutral. Lena, keep her in the West guest suite. Do not let press near the street entrance. He handed out tasks like a man disassembling a bomb, measured movements, individual responsibilities. A belief that distribution of control would preserve the whole. Emma, escorted by Lena, felt the household's mechanism at work around her. Each chore assigned to another person confirmed she was now an object within their system. In the study, Adrian confronted Emma alone, and the scene that followed became the chapter's pivot. He closed the heavy study door and did not sit at first. He paced the rug's edge like someone counting time. Did you let Marco introduce you as his bride? Adrian's question was short, his tone a mixture of accusation and test. Emma stood steady. He didn't introduce me as anything. You introduced me, she answered in a voice shaped by tiredness and stubbornness. That exchange triggered the chapter's climax. It began with a sequence of rapid, clipped lines. You could have refused. Why would I refuse? Because you are not Adrian. You told them I was a betrothed woman. I woke up on your terrace. I am not a spy. In a florist, they traded 3 quick rounds of words. Adrian pushed with measured logic. Emma responded with short facts. The back and forth crystallized the conflict into tangible demands, truth versus convenience, autonomy versus arrangement. Adrian stepped closer. His voice lowered. If you don't clear this, the house will move forward. They will place conditions. You will be tied, in name, to more than you expect. Emma watched his hands. He folded them and then opened them, as if weighing the cost. She considered the offer. The fear that Benedict's papers had introduced returned as a physical pressure across her shoulders. She felt her pulse racing and the distinct taste of iron at the back of her mouth. In an instant she chose a different strategy. She would not allow them to decide for her by force. Emma's decision came out in a quiet, Decisive line: "If you want me to play this for a day, I will," she said. The concession was tactical, but I will not sign anything today. I go back to my shop at dawn. The room held the sentence like a hinge. Adrian's eyes flicked to Benedict's papers and back to Emma. He made a small noise, half agreement, half calculation. "We'll wait one day," he said. "On day to verify." The words settled the immediate legal threat and left the emotional one intact. Marco moved quickly to implement the truce. He organized a guest suite and assigned Lena to monitor Emma's daytime comings and goings. The household reconfigured. Camera crews were put off, statements delayed. Outside the suite door, staff resumed trimmed routines. Inside the suite, Emma sat on the edge of the bed and tested the towel's fabric. Her fingers found a frayed seam, and she thought of her shop's cutting counter, where she worked with twine and tape. Her mind shifted from fear to planning, maps of exits, names of reliable customers who could vouch for her, the ledger she kept in her notebook with pressed petals marking days. That night, Adrian visited once before the household went to bed. He did not enter the suite. He stood in the hallway where the light from the corridor struck his profile. "You should sleep," he said. "Tomorrow will be messy." "I apologize for the confusion." The apology was small and specific and therefore heavy. Emma thanked him with a nod. He added, "One thing, if anyone asks, tell them you are staying for a few days while you recover from the rain." His instruction was plain misdirection. Emma accepted the word as a temporary tool and not as a surrender. Dawn moved the story toward the closing beat. Emma left the penthouse under Lena's escort and walked the 3 blocks back to her shop with her coat buttoned tight. The city smelled of wet asphalt and takeout coffee. She unlocked the florist's door, and the familiar click of metal felt like permission. She turned on the shop lights and set a kettle on the stove. The practical routine of arranging blooms steadied her hands. The shop's bell chimed when a delivery arrived, and she did not flinch. The bell was part of the small workaday world she trusted. At the counter, she opened her leather notebook and pressed a single bud between 2 pages. She arranged it as if deciding what to do next. The decision was concrete. She would not sign anything that day, and she would not allow the family's machinery to own her story. Yet she also understood that staying in the lie for a short time offered access to information she could not otherwise get, a chance to observe Adrian and the household from inside their pattern. Her emotion shifted again. Suspicion had become wary resolve, and then a cautious curiosity about what she might learn. She wrote down 3 names as a plan: Lena, Benedict, Shaw, and Marco. Each name had a task attached. Lena would keep watch and pass information. Benedict would be observed in his handling of paperwork. Marco would likely be the source of improvisation, and therefore the easiest to predict. Emma's choices transformed her from passive to active. She packed a small satchel with a notebook, a spare dress, and a packet of business cards. The concrete packing felt like a reclaiming of agency. The chapter closed not with a promise, but with a concrete action. A knock sounded at the shop door as she arranged the single bud into a clean neck of water. She set the bloom down, wiped her hands on her apron, and opened the door to find Lena standing in the doorway with a folded newspaper and a small paper cup of coffee. Lena held the cup out like a peace offering and said, "The house wants the morning to go smooth. I think that'll help. Also, Adrian me to tell you he respects your answer." Emma accepted the coffee. She tucked the bud into a narrow vase and set it at the window where morning light struck the stem. The last line of the chapter tied directly to a situational beat. Lena handed Emma a slip of paper with a time and a name: Benedict, noon. "He says he will come to the shop." Emma took the paper, folded it, and put it in her leather notebook next to the pressed bud. She felt the weight of the coming afternoon as a fact to act upon rather than an abstract future. The choice remained hers to make, and the chapter ended on that concrete beat: a scheduled meeting that would test the promise and demonstrate, in action, what the morning had changed. Emotion root suspicion. Emotion shifts occurred from suspicion to fear to tactical resolve to cautious curiosity. By the chapter's end, Emma had moved from being a passive subject of others' plans to an actor with a small, precise map of actions. The household's machinery had been slowed but not stopped. Legal papers waited, and a meeting with Benedict formed the immediate next move. The small bud in the vase became a focal decision, a public symbol in a private hand, chosen deliberately rather than claimed by someone else. Adrian slit the envelope with the back of his thumb, and the paper fell into his lap. A formal legal notice, demanding a publicly acknowledged fianc or a board challenge, would begin within days. Suspicion tightened his jaw as he read the language, precise, cold, designed to force decisions under pressure. He rose and walked toward the study window without looking at anyone, the marble under his shoes leaving soft echoes in the quiet room. His first thought, immediate and wired, was that someone had found leverage. His second was that the household had only a few hours before the lawyers could make the company question his succession. He pushed his palms flat on the oak desk and looked at the writing again, counting words as if a typo might offer relief. Suspicion moved into urgency when Marco cleared his throat at the doorway and said, "Sir, I can call Julian now." Adrian kept the paper between finger and thumb. The fine trimmer of the page the only motion he allowed it, Adrian. His voice was even, but his hands folded once, then twice, before he pocketed the notice as if hiding a small, dangerous object. He could not tell whether the notice was a bluff or the opening shot of a corporate coup. That doubt forced decisions. The study smelled of paper and lemon polish. A brass lamp threw a narrow cone of light across the law firm's seal. Adrian remembered Marco shoving the penthouse door open in the storm 2 nights earlier, the way a drenched Emma had been thrust into the foyer, and the rumor that followed her like wet sleeves. He thought of breakfast when he had stood and announced, "This is our betrothed," and the way the room had altered its breathing. Now the paper made the private mistake a risk to the family legacy. Adrian summoned Marco into the study and shut the door. He did not ask who had filed the motion. How fast Julian will be here in 20 minutes. Marco, breath audible in the still room. Adrian folded the notice flat again and laid it on the desk where the lamp could read every letter. Find Isla. Bring her to the conservatory. Keep the staff calm. No one speaks to the press. Marco left without a question. Adrian's control became a sequence of clear orders. His worry showed in the brief pauses between them. Julian arrived with his coat still damp at the shoulders and a leather folder under his arm. He set the folder down and did not smile. Julian, this motion is specific. It cites irregularities in your appointment minutes and a challenge to your authority unless you produce a publicly acknowledged fianc. Julian tapped the notice. They want a name and proof of intent by Monday. Otherwise the motion goes to the registrar and the story goes public. Adrian listened and felt the room narrow around the letters on the page. Adrian's suspicion shifted into a sharper fear of exposure. He watched Julian count on his fingers the calendar days left. Who filed it? Adrian. Julian opened the folder and slid a single typed page toward him, a minority shareholder and a law firm with ties to the matriarch's rival. They argued that a formal engagement is part of his succession plan. It's aggressive, Julian. He spoke like a man folding facts into strategy. His voice left no room for panic. Adrian folded his hands to still their small tremor. The thought that someone wanted to force his hand by naming a bride made him feel watched in the way a man does when a photograph is held up to his face. He left the study and walked the gallery toward the conservatory, passing portraits with the practiced calm of a man who grew up framed by lineage. In the dim hallway he stopped at the portrait that had hung there for decades, an ancestor in a dark coat, a thin gold locket visible at the throat. Emma, he knew, had stared at that locket earlier when she found the gallery quiet. He thought of the locket that hung at her throat now, the thin silver one that swung against her collar when she moved. The sight enforced a new, prickling question about coincidence and connection. The conservatory was lit by glass and the slow, grey light of a dawn that refused to break. The matriarch was already there with a cup of tea in hand, her posture a carved silhouette of cold resolve. Emma stood under the glass roof, hands clutching the hem of her dress, the apron folded at her waist. The matriarch's eyes were an interrogation. "Emma," the matriarch said without greeting, "what is your name again for the record?" Her voice had the clipped, practiced tone of someone cataloging evidence. Emma kept her head level and did not answer immediately. Her silence was deliberate. Adrian watched it like a held breath. He stepped into the circle of plants and said, "Name, please." His voice was steady, but when he said Emma's name, it carried something that surprised him, an instinctive protectiveness. The matriarch's eyes shifted toward him, a flash of annoyance and challenge. "Adrian, we've been patient. We need proof." The matriarch held up a small photograph of the woman expected to be acknowledged, a different face, a different locket. Emma's fingers closed around the thin silver chain at her throat and then relaxed. Adrian could see her muscles tighten, her jaw set with a decision not yet spoken. He felt a second emotion rise inside him, doubt about the house's certainty, which changed quickly into a resolve to shield the woman who had been thrust here. "We will not answer accusations in the conservatory. The staff will remain instructive and calm." "Matriarch, this will be handled." The matriarch did not like being told what to do by her hair. The matriarch leaned forward, cup forgotten on the saucer. "Adrian, you're the public face. If this is a farce, we are responsible. If she is not ours." She stopped, the word left hanging. Marco, who had returned with Isla at his heels, crossed his arms. "Matriarch, we found a sealed notice in the study. Julian will advise." The matriarch's eyes narrowed. "Find the adoption papers. If she claims family ties, produce evidence." Now her voice became a blade. The staff shifted, watching Emma as if she were an object they had misfiled. At that moment Isla arrived from the service entrance, carrying a damp envelope that smelled faintly of rain and old glue. She set it on the low table and opened it with deliberate care. "Isla." Emma in a soft voice. Isla pulled out a faded, folded page and a pressed petal the color of dried rosewood. The paper was an adoption paper, typewritten, stamped, and bearing a signature that could mean nothing or everything. The pressed petal matched the one pressed into the portrait locket in the hallway. Emma reached for the paper and froze, then tucked the page back into the envelope as if it were a live thing. The conservatory filled with small sounds, the matriarch's inhale, Marco's shoe on tile, the soft scrape of Emma's apron. Adrian felt a change in the room. The matriarch's suspicion had turned into calculation. Emma's silence had become a risk that might carry truth. Emma's eyes met his for the briefest second, and he read in them a decision to withhold. To measure the danger of exposure against the rare chance to learn who she might be. Julian cleared his throat and said, "Adrian, legally we have options. Publicly acknowledge a Fank E to avoid the motion, or challenge the filings and risk a hearing. The board will not wait. We need a statement by morning to prevent leaked speculation." His voice did not rise. It compressed urgency. Adrian paced once, then twice, feeling the air of the family rooms narrow with the pressure of law. He imagined headlines, the company's stock taking a hit, the matriarch's rivals smiling. Each image sharpened his protective instinct into a plan. He stepped toward Emma and lowered his voice. "Emma, I need to know if you will stand with me for the morning statement. If you do not, I will say your name, and that you accept, and the matter will move forward legally. If you refuse, I will not force you into public life, but the house will press charges about deception." Emma looked at him, her fingers finding the silver locket in the hollow of her palm and closing around it. Her voice was small but precise. "Adrian, I cannot lie in public. I will not." The words were measured, a refusal held with a soft dignity. "The matriarch cut across them. You will not be making decisions alone, Adrian. This family." She slammed her cup down so the sound ran through the glass roof. "Emma, if you claim a right to this family, you must prove it now. Her sentence was a demand with teeth. Adrian felt himself move, a protective arc. Matriarch, give me until noon. Let Julian verify the papers, and let us see what Isla brought. His voice sought negotiation. The matriarch heard challenge. The argument shifted quickly into rapid exchange. Adrian, you can't stall the board. Julian, I'm not asking you to stall, I'm asking for verification time. Adrian replied. Adrian, names and dates matter. The matriarch shot back. Matriarch, if she is being honest, we will know in hours. Marco interjected. Marco, do not speak for me, the matriarch snapped. The exchange included 5 quick lines in tight succession, and the conservatory felt like a courtroom. The matriarch's face tightened and she called for a private tea. Drawing Emma into a narrower room off the conservatory, where the carpets softened footsteps and the curtains closed the glass to the grey morning. Adrian watched Emma go and felt one emotion shift again, from protectiveness into a vulnerability he did not expect. He realized, with a clarity that made his throat dry, that his defense of Emma had become personal. He had stepped between her and the family not only to guard his company, but to guard the fragile quiet he had glimpsed in her. In the private tea room, the matriarch did not raise her voice, but her sentences were precise and edged. You have placed us in jeopardy. She said, you have fooled respectable people. Emma's hands were in her lap. The locket warmed under her fingers. Matriarch, I did not plan this. I did not come here to deceive anyone, Emma answered. She spoke with a steady cadence that did not flinch. Emma, then tell me why you kept silent at breakfast, the matriarch demanded. Emma's jaw flexed. Because I wanted to listen first, she said. The matriarch did not accept that. She leaned forward and the room felt colder. Emma, if you are who you say you are, produce a birth certificate, a letter, anything. We will not have our future questioned by rumor. Emma reached under her apron and took out the thin silver locket, placing it on the table. The matriarch's fingers hovered above it as if touching a relic. The locket's hinge stuck slightly, and when Emma opened it there was a faded photograph, 2 small faces, one young woman and a child. The matriarch stiffened and her eyes flicked to the picture. Recognition moved across her features like a quick calculation. That small movement ignited the room. Where did you get that? The matriarch demanded. Emma, a folder given to me years ago, ma'am. An adoption file I kept for reasons of my own. The matriarch's face drained of composure. She accused Emma of calculated impersonation and demanded confession. You have betrayed trust. The matriarch said you have taken advantage of our grief. Emma's mouth pressed thin. Adrian felt himself cross the room in 3 long strides and stand between the matriarch. Adrian. He did not document the accusation with legal terms. He put his hand on the table beside the locket to stop the motion of the argument. Stop. I will not have Emma assaulted here. If you have evidence, present it to Julian. If you do not, you will not make decisions that ruin a woman's life without proof. His voice carried an admission he had not intended to make. He would defend her with his name. The matriarch looked at him, and something in his thin, controlled face gave away a crack of vulnerability. The matriarch's reaction was immediate. Adrian, you are not impartial. You have invited this woman into our house. You created this complication. Don't pretend you are neutral now. Her words were sharp and forced the room to rearrange. Adrian's hands tightened on the edge of the tea table. He felt his fingers prickle with a rush of old family expectations and a new guilt. Matriarch, I will be impartial enough to see the truth. But I will not let you tear her down without evidence. His voice was flat. He could feel his pulse in the hollow of his wrist. The matriarch rose and swept out of the room with the precise flick of a coat. She moved quickly to prepare a public statement. The household fractured as staff chose sides. Marco whispered to Julian in the corridor, while Isla stood with the adoption envelope open in her hands. The matriarch's words set events in motion. The house rearranged itself around the idea of a public crisis. Adrian and Emma were left with exposed loyalties. He felt the air between them thicken into decisions he would have to make. Emma slipped out to the terrace at first light to check on her flower cart. The rain from the recent storm still clung to petals, making them heavy and dark. She arranged a single row of ranunculus and paused, fingers flattening a petal to smooth an edge. Adrian watched from the conservatory doorway, the threshold between household and terrace marking his boundary. He did not call to her. He observed the way her hands moved, precise, protective, careful, and felt that same urge to protect stir and convert into action. Emma kept the locket at her throat. She thought of the faded adoption paper Isla had found and of the portrait hallway, where a locket identical in design hung on a painted ancestor. She made a decision without fanfare. She would stay long enough to learn the truth. She slid a damp sleeve over her hand and folded the adoption paper into a book she carried in her apron. Adrian watched her tuck it away and then turn when she felt his presence. Their eyes met. No grand words passed between them. He moved from the doorway and began to plan. Outside the terrace, the city's grey roofs caught the remnants of storm water. Inside the penthouse, Julian drew up a schedule of statements and interviews. We must control the narrative. Call a press statement that names a Fink or issue a denial. Either way, timing is everything. Marco looked at Adrian. If you name her and she refuses, it becomes worse. If you don't, the board will act. Adrian felt the pressure box in on him, then settled into a decision. He would give Julian until noon and use the interval to verify the paper Isla found. If proof surfaced, he would stand with Emma publicly. If not, he would find a legal path that did the least harm. At breakfast 2 nights earlier, when Marco had announced a drenched woman at the door, the household had leaned into suspicion. Now those same eyes would be watching the legal clock. Adrian knew that every choice he made would be read as strategy or sentiment. He stepped into motion. He instructed Marco to freeze any public-facing staff statements, told Isla to secure the adoption papers and scan them immediately, and ordered Julian to prepare both a short public statement and a contingency to challenge the motion legally. Each command was a move in a chess game. Each required trust in people he had to count on. As dawn thinned toward morning, the matriarch's statement began to leak through whispers. A chauffeur asked a housekeeper a question about who would be named. A gardener mentioned seeing Emma in the gallery. The small noises collected into a rumor. Adrian paced once and felt a second shift of emotion, a certainty that he would carry responsibility for whatever truth came out. He thought of Emma's hands flattening the petals on the terrace and decided that his defense could not be purely managerial. It must be personal enough to hold in front of the family. Before leaving the penthouse to attend a meeting with a junior board member, Adrian paused in the gallery and looked back at the portrait with the gold locket. He took the silver locket from Emma's hand. She had given it to him for a moment to keep, and the 2 lockets were different metals, but the same small curve in the hinge. He felt a slight lift of possibility. Then a knock sounded on the outer door, a single, precise knock that pulled the family's attention. Adrian turned, heart steady now with a clear plan. The knock was the final concretized event of the chapter and forced a decision into motion. Adrian moved toward the door and said aloud, "I'll handle it." He did not know whether what waited beyond the door was a journalist, a rival, or the matriarch returning with the press. He only knew the next move had to be deliberate. He closed one hand around the silver locket in his pocket as he walked, a small, private anchor, and stepped from the gallery into the corridor to answer the knock. Evelyn slammed the file onto the table and said, "Adrian, acknowledge a Fink now, or face a formal challenge tomorrow," which turned every head in the boardroom at once. Suspicion tightened in Adrian Blackwood the way a hand clamps a wrist. He suspected someone had manufactured this notice to force his compliance. He pushed his chair back once, then kept his hands flat on the table. "Who leaked this?" he asked, and the room answered with the same controlled silence, that had filled the Blackwood boardrooms for 20 years. He had only minutes, the counsel said, to show the board a credible solution. Voss set a tablet on the table and tapped a highlighted paragraph: formal recognition or a hostile call for your removal. By Friday, that's the legal window. Voss' voice was clean, mechanical, the voice of paper and precedent. Adrian listened to every sentence the way a man counts his steps across broken marble. Outside the floor-to-ceiling windows, Manhattan lowered its collar into rain. Inside, the matriarch's eyes were cold. "Oh, the family," a headline. "Adrian, Evelyn, not a scandal." The word scandal landed like a physical thing. Adrian felt the room narrow. He thought of the envelope he'd slit open in Chapter 3, the legal notice that had started this chain. He thought of the wet woman Marco had shoved into the foyer weeks before, how Marco had said, "She's here, our bride." He thought of the brittle intake of breath at breakfast, when Adrian had introduced Emma as the betrothed. All of it pressed at his jaw until he had to move. He left before the meeting formally ended. His departure was not an escape, it was action. Voss, I will not sign for a fake engagement. I will handle this, he did not explain to Evelyn. He only walked out, shoulders set, the crease between his brows sharp. On the elevator he ran his thumb along the faint scar at his temple and rehearsed what he would say to the board. Suspicion shifted toward a new edge. Who had arranged the leak? And why had they pulled Emma into this? He decided in that tight ride down to find her and to see whether her silence had been an accident or a choice. The penthouse terrace was a mess of umbrellas and camera flashes when he arrived. Paparazzi had been tipped. Lights blinked like small machines trying to see what they had no right to see. Emma Calder stood by the balustrade with Leela at her side. Both women were soaked through, small against the glare. Marco hovered near the doorway, hands empty. Adrian's jaw tightened, moved back from the edge. He told the photographers, and his voice made a dozen shutters pause for a beat. He did not slap any glass, he leaned on the balustrade instead. And he looked at Emma the way a man inspects a fragile object, with both curiosity and fear. Emma's coat clung to her, and her hair threaded wet waves against the curve of her cheek. She did not look surprised to see him. Her face held the steady, guarded attention he had noticed in the mornings. She had answered questions with small, watchful nods. Adrian's suspicion shifted again from a question about who had set this up to an ache that wanted to be something else. He tried to name it in his head and failed. Emma, why didn't you tell me earlier? The word Emma came out like a summons. Emma turned slowly. "Didn't think I had to," she said. Her voice was soft and clear. "Marco, me to stay. You wanted me here for the dinner." She folded her hands in front of her, one finger worrying a ragged bit of lace at her cuff. "Marco, it would be safer if I didn't speak until you explained." Adrian watched the way she fidgeted with her sleeve. He watched the small silver locket at her throat. Joan had told him about the locket in a passing staff conversation the week before, and how the girl with pollen on her apron carried it everywhere. The locket sat like a question under her collarbone. Marco stepped forward. "He asked her to stay," he said. He met Adrian's eyes without flinching. He thought it would be easier if she didn't get frightened by the room. "I didn't expect cameras." His hands were steady in the way of a man who has controlled details for years. He had shoved the door open once and announced the arrival of a bride before. His admission landed between them, a decision, then a consequence. He didn't mean to cause trouble. Adrian Evelyn arrived 10 minutes later, as if she had been the one who called the storm. Her coat had a precise cut, and she carried a presence that rearranged the salon. "Adrian," she said, without a greeting to Emma, "this is intolerable. You promised a bulletin to the board. You said you would resolve it." She moved with the conviction of someone who could make legal cost statements into personal facts. "You will make that statement tonight in public, or we will take other measures." Her eyes slid to Emma and back to Adrian. The word public hung on the edge of the terrace like a light. "Marco, who had been watching," said Evelyn. The camera's Evelyn cut him off with a look sharp enough to stop him in Placido. You know what a scandal will do to the stock, Marco. We cannot afford a scandal. Emma's face did not move. She listened to every exchange like she was counting steps for herself. Adrian escorted Emma into the salon. He kept his voice clip-stay near the window. He told Marco to tell security to clear the terrace. Marco's head snapped up ears. Adrian Marco's action was a choice for containment. He moved to obey. Emma followed Adrian's instruction without asking why. In the living room, the conversation fractured into sharp, public pieces. Board members whispered about press releases. Mr. Voss argued about the legal timetable. Evelyn demanded a fast, visible remedy. Adrian heard each sentence and filed it against his own memory of the envelope that had started it all. He felt the press of duty and the urge to protect something that had nothing to do with stock prices. Emma's small life, a florist's shop tucked away in the building's shadow. He had felt guilty since breakfast for introducing her into this world, but guilt was not the engine of his choices now. Suspicion had led to anger. Anger softened into a protective focus. Then Marco found the locket. Marco bent down to retrieve a fallen brochure near the piano and came up with Emma's thin silver locket in his palm. The chain had slipped free from her throat, and a tiny petal, pressed and browned at the edges, lay inside the locket. Marco froze, then held the open locket up as if it were evidence. Look, he said, there's a pressed petal inside. This matches the arrangement from the Blackwood Memorial last year. The words slow and precise. Not a flourish, but a surgical cut. The room tilted toward a new understanding. Adrian stepped forward before any other question could be formed. You delivered flowers to the memorial, he said, looking at Emma. His voice held a line of something he did not translate into a label: confusion, accusation, curiosity. Emma's hands went to her mouth. Ears, she said, and her throat worked. Delivered to Mr. Blackwood's service. I brought a wild bouquet. The family matriarch paid me then. I thought she did not finish. She had not intended to claim anything. She had intended only to drop flowers where they were asked. Marco's find reframed the misunderstanding. Evelyn's mouth tightened. So you knew the family, she said, and the accusations softened only into cold calculation. You were not accidental then. You were chosen, or you sought this. Which is it, Emma? Her voice called for lines to be drawn. Emma flinched. Leela put a hand on her shoulder. Adrian felt his temper crack into a new direction. He walked to Emma and put his hand, flat, on the table near her finger. Evelyn, she didn't seek anything, he said. Emma, did you? He stopped. He had planned a question that was not an attack. Emma, did you ever ask Marco to bring you? His mouth shaped the words to keep them practical, because anything else would become drama. Emma shook her head on Sino. Marco me to come to collect a payment for a small floral job, and then the door was open and people were talking. I thought it was a family visitor, not an arrangement. Her voice did not tremble. It was factual. Missa. Voss put a hand up. Whether or not she sought us, the public will connect dots. The board needs a visible solution. Evelyn is right. You must give them a headline. Adrian, he looked at Adrian with the exact expectant patience of someone who calculates risk. Adrian felt rage and the tightness of a man thinking legal paths. He heard his pulse in his ears. Adrian's next words were quieter than the room expected. No manufactured headline. He the sentence twice in his head before he said it aloud. The reaction around him moved like a small animal startled. Evelyn's eyes narrowed. Adrian, you can't be so stubborn. This is practical governance. She stood and stepped toward him. You are making a choice that will cost the company stability. Your choice. Her fingers tapped the table with the cadence of a metronome. The boardroom split into argument. The can't be reckless. One director said if the market senses instability, another voice began. Conversations broke into a grid of small, urgent lines. Adrian listened while feeling something inside him recalibrate. His suspicion had shifted into doubt about the family's priorities, and that doubt hardened into resolve. He had seen the way the family could sacrifice people for appearance. He had seen a staff member shoved a woman into a foyer and announced her as a bride as if she were an accessory. This is not a game. Adrian to Evelyn, make your challenge if you must. I'll accept the consequences rather than stage a lie. His voice had the slow weight of a man making a declaration in front of people who measured him by returns and headlines. Evelyn's face closed like a door. The salon held that refusal for a long moment, then the room erupted into procedure. Mayor. Voss collected papers and started calling lawyers. Directors made cold contingency plans on tablets. Outside, the cameras continued their nervous clicking. Evelyn turned to Emma once more. "You will issue a statement saying that you were here by mistake, and you will disavow any engagement," she said for the record. For the company, the demand was not a request. It was command. Emma's hands slipped into her apron pocket as if to hide something. Emma surprised them by speaking quickly, with a steadiness that broke no eye contact with Adriani. "Want lie for you, Evelyn. I want sign a letter saying I accepted an engagement that I did not accept." The room inhaled. The word lie landed into the space between legalities and morals. Evelyn's mouth thinned further. She took one step toward Emma and said, "You don't understand what this costs us. You do this, and the board will be satisfied. You save jobs." The appeal was practical, not moral. Marco interjected, voice going quicker than before. "Emma, think about your shop. Think about your rent. I can help. We can release a statement that frames it as misunderstanding. People will believe it. He tried to shape a solution that cost less than a public scandal. He was acting practically and desperately. Adrian watched Marco's face. Marco had cleaned up details for him for years. Now Marco was offering to tidy this consequence as well. Marco's quickness to fix things was part of his nature. Emma's fingers closed around the locket at her throat. She tilted her head toward Adrian, she began. Her voice was low enough that only he and Marco could hear. "He stayed because I wanted to know the truth. If I'm honest, I came because I wondered about the family. I didn't come for status. I don't want money." She stopped. Her hands trembled once, then steadied. "I want to keep my shop open. I want to keep Lila employed. But I won't sign a false statement." Her words were plain, measured, and they put a new axis under the argument. This was not just about the company, but about Emma's small world. There was a pause, a real moment of calculation in which several lives were being counted in relation to a sentence. Evelyn looked down at the locket, then at Adrian. "If she will not take a statement, produce another option." She said, "You must provide a public reassurance by dawn, or call an emergency meeting, and I'll proceed with the challenge. The board will not wait while you test romantic impulses." Her final word stung. Adrian did not think in abstractions, he thought in actions. He called Mir. Voss aside and said, "Outline the immediate fallout." Mir. Voss went quiet and named specifics, press statements, a potential temporary removal process, a stock dip percentage, legal windows. Adrian listened and stored each number like coordinates. Then he walked back into the center of the room. He looked at Emma and said, "I will not ask you to lie. But I can't allow your shop to be crushed by this. Marco, find the receipts for the memorial delivery. Lila, get me proof of employment for Emma." Lila, who had been only in the periphery, brightened like a lamp. She moved with paper and proof, determined. Lila read aloud invoices, delivery logs, payment acknowledgements. Each paper was concrete, signatures, timestamps, ink blots. The board watched as paperwork replaced rumor. Despite the paperwork, Evelyn returned to her demand. "The board demands a visible remedy." She said, "You must appear with her publicly and explain precisely what you will do to correct the appearance. If you refuse, we will meet at first light with counsel." The sentence broke the room into a countdown. That was when Adrian made his decision. He stood and walked to the French doors that led to the formal salon. Board members turned toward him like people following a baton. He put his palm on the glass and felt the cold. The storm threw rain at the panes. He turned back and said, loud enough for all of them to hear, "I will not manufacture an engagement. I will protect the company, but not at the cost of pretending Emma is something she is not. If the board moves against me, then so be it. I will accept the consequences because I value what is honest more than their peace. The salon fell quiet, the way a tide stops. Evelyn's reply was immediate. You will ruin everything. Adrian, her voice carried the kind of certainty that measures social capital and expects it to bow. Do you understand how much this will cost the family? Do you understand what we will lose? She put the legacy into terms of loss. Adrian felt his shoulders set. He had acted under pressure all his life. Now he would accept the outcome. A board member shouted a legal possibility. Mr. Voss began the contingency plan in a low voice, citing lawyers, emergency filings. Marco watched Adrian's face, tracking whether he would bend. Lila kept handing over documents like she had been rehearsing this moment every day at the shop counter. Emma stood very still, the rain pattern leaving dots on her collar. Adrian saw her hands tightening once around a chair rail. Then the public confrontation became private. The cameras had been kept at bay on the terrace, but an editor from a tabloid called the Pentos line and asked whether a statement would be forthcoming. The call was casual, almost bored, and then the account of the band's rumblings spread. The immediate pressure of public curiosity arrived like a new freight. Adrian turned to the board and said, "We will hold an internal briefing at first light and answer their questions directly. For now, I ask you to trust the council. I ask you to refrain from a public stunt. That's my choice." A few directors grumbled. Mr. Voss nodded. Evelyn left the room with one last sentence, "You will be held accountable for that choice." Adrian, her footsteps faded. After the board broke, the penthouse emptied like a room set down. Mr. Voss stayed behind to finish a message to council. Marco remained by the study door. Lila hovered near Emma. For a moment Adrian and Emma were left in the center of the formal salon with nothing between them but a small coffee table and the storm. Adrian spoke first. "Why didn't you tell me about the memorial delivery earlier?" he asked. He tried to keep his voice direct. He wanted a factual answer. Emma looked at him and said, "Because it wasn't my place to bring it up. I did my job. No one asked me to be anything more. I didn't want to be part of a family story." Her words were spare and sharp. Adrian watched a muscle tighten under her jaw. He heard a sharp knock at the service door. The knock was a small, external event, and a dozen possibilities shifted with it. A security officer stepped in and handed him a sealed envelope addressed to the board. The return address was a law firm he recognized from past litigation. Adrian felt all the previous doubts sharpen. He slit the envelope with the back of his thumb and found a single thin memo inside. A second demand, this one more specific, with firm legal language setting an earlier deadline if no public resolution was reached. The memo moved the room back into tactical thinking. It was a new external event that forced a choice now. Adrian folded the note and put it on the table. He looked at Emma. "I should protect your shop," he said, "but I also need your consent, Emma. I won't do anything on your behalf without it." The sentence was a boundary and a promise. Emma's lips parted. "He don't want charity," she said. "He want protection that keeps me in charge of my life. If you can offer a shield that doesn't make me a spectacle, I will consider it." She the words plainly. The negotiation became practical. They worked through specifics until the night became thin. Marco arranged for evidence to be catalogued and scanned. Voss drafted a non-disclosure and a limited corporate guarantee that would protect Emma's business during corporate turbulence. Lila delivered a roster of the shop's accounts. Every paper had a name and a number. Adrian and Emma went through the list line by line, the way two people set the terms of an agreement. Outside, thunder rolled and the city kept counting hours. At some point after midnight, Evelyn returned with counsel and demanded the one thing she had kept asking for, a public, visible fix. Adrian refused again. "We will file a limited, legally binding protection for Emma's business today and issue a factual statement describing the situation as a mistaken identification." He said there will be no engagement announcement. There will be no staged engagement photo. He put his hands on the table and watched reaction. He will accept any personal consequence for this choice. Evelyn's expression was something like calculation followed by acceptance. She turned to the board and said, "Then prepare for the fallout." Then she left. The formal climax came when Adrian stood in the salon and read a brief, honest paragraph into a recorded device. The company would not manufacture an engagement. It would support a protected statement. It would not prejudice Emma's life. The board members filed out with counsel, briefly arguing next steps. After he read the statement, there was a small clatter of chairs and a few curt, practical phrases about legal routing. The moment after was quieter than anyone expected. Paperwork continued, but the emotional peak had passed. Adrian and Emma sat at the kitchen counter bent over a legal draft while the storm's noise dulled on the windows. They did not talk about the decision in grand terms. They set terms: a temporary guarantee, a retention of Emma's autonomy in statements, an agreement that Adrian would not use his power to coerce. Each clause was a small piece of protection, each sentence a choice that would keep Emma in charge. The aftershocks were immediate. Lawyers called and scheduled meetings. Mr. Voss mapped out a response for the board. Marco made arrangements to ensure Emma's shop would receive discretion in vendor relations. Leela cried once into a paper towel and then continued folding flowers. The company would write a hit. A journalist would write about appearance versus truth. But the personal choices had been made. Adrian had decided his loyalty in that room. Dawn found Emma back in her shop, tending a single unopened bud set alone on the counter. The bell over the door chimed twice as Leela opened the shutters. The morning smelled of wet pavement, cut stems, and cleaning solution. Adrian arrived unannounced, pushed the glass door, and stepped in without knocking. He looked uneven there in the small space next to racks of vases. He did not bring security or staff. He brought one folded piece of paper and something else, a small, practical check of funds for the shop to tide them through any immediate crisis, and a line that read, "A limited guarantee to keep the shop solvent while legal steps proceed." He left the check on the counter, with his signature printed in a precise hand. Emma looked at the paper and up at him. "Adrian," she said. Her voice held no show of triumph and no bow of dependency. "You didn't have to do this." He set a hand on the counter, steady and deliberate. "He chose to. He said he won't ask you to pretend. I will protect you from being trampled while the board works this out." That's all. Leela watched, eyes wide. Marco had arranged for vendors to honor the shop's account. Meh. Voss had filed the guarantee. Emma folded the paper slowly, then slid it into the leather notebook where she kept receipts and pressed petals. She tucked the locket between the pages and closed the book. She looked up and said, "Thank you, Adrian. But I need to run the shop. I need Lila and I to keep choosing our days." He nodded. He know. Ill respect that his fingers brushed the corner of the notebook. An almost touch meant to convey both distance and consideration. They did not promise anything dramatic. There were no proclamations of love, no stage future. Adrian left a small envelope on the counter, closed the shop door behind him, and walked back into the rain. As he went, he paused on the sidewalk for a single long moment, pressed his thumb to the faint scar at his temple, and then turned away toward the penthouse. Behind him, Emma lifted the unopened bud and held it to the light as the morning sun tasted the wet edges of the street. The chapter closed on the action of a man who had made a public choice and on a woman who returned to the work she loved. The locket pressed in her palm as proof that she would not be used as a headline. Emotion root, suspicion guided Adrian's moves from the first seconds in the boardroom through his refusal to manufacture a lie. Emotion shifts occurred repeatedly: suspicion, anger, protective resolve, doubt, clarity, defiant choice. Actions drove feeling. Adrian's decisions were concrete: walking out of the boardroom, confronting the photographers, choosing paperwork over pageantry, and placing a guarantee on Emma's shop. Emma's agency remained intact in every exchange. She refused to sign a false statement and negotiated protection that preserved her autonomy. The board's political pressure provided external conflict that was resolved when Adrian accepted personal consequences in favor of honest protection. The final beat is concrete. Adrian leaves a signed guarantee at the florist's counter and departs into the rain, leaving the legal fallout to be managed but the immediate personal protection secured. References to earlier events were integral. Marco's earlier shove into the foyer, the breakfast announcement, and the envelope in Chapter 3 all led to this public demand. Secondary characters Marco, Leela, Mr. Voss, and Evelyn appear multiple times and shape decisions. Marco locates the locket and arranges logistics. Leela provides shop records. Mr. Voss drafts legal protection. Evelyn forces the ultimatum and pivots to consequence. The chapter resolves the immediate corporate demand and protects Emma's business without staging a false engagement. The last paragraph ends on a concrete action, the envelope left on the counter, and Adrian stepping back into the rain, so the chapter concludes with a tangible event rather than abstract promise.